Hey guys, Darren Kelly, Coach of Wise Rushing Pods, and welcome back to another Captain's episode. Heading into round 21, this week is going to be a little bit trickier than what it has been in the last couple of weeks, with what it seems like to be a lot of good options in the ruck lineup and a few decent midfielders here and there, but not a huge amount of ceiling in my opinion. That's going to be a bit of a lower week, so yes, let's get into it and plan accordingly. So, what I always do, I always check my rankings. I have slipped a little bit. I didn't have the greatest week. 1887. Top end was really good, but really fourth and so on really didn't help me. Really missing, the big scores. When I look at the season, I'm down to fifth. I can't remember exactly who I missed out on. Obviously Nasai, not having him in there really hurt me. I thought he was going to come a tag, but he obviously didn't. Bond didn't have the data there to say that he was going to go big, so I avoided that. He was outside my top five, and Brody Grundy also wasn't part of my top five either. So yeah, a few just missing those really big ceiling scores, but overall quite happy with how they all performed. But let's get straight into what my picks are this week. So I don't think we're touching too many players from Thursday, Friday night games. Both of them are quite tough. Bulldogs and Giants are fighting for a top 8 spot. If the Bulldogs lose, they pretty much are not going to make finals. They're going to rely on a few other uh, results to go their way to get there. So I think they're going to come out firing. It is at Marvel, so they do have a bit of an advantage there. But Giants are one of the toughest, I think the toughest midfield matchup at the moment. So guys like your Bontempelli and stuff like that, they're not really considered in my top 10 at this stage. Plus, there's a potential tag option with the likes of Toby Bedford. He obviously can do a bit of job here and there. So there's a bit of a concern there for him, but I don't think it's going to happen to Bont as such. So you could go there with your VC if you just want to have a stab in the dark and you're trusting whoever's your C option. You're pretty confident there. I don't mind it, but he does not make my top 10. On the same side of the coin, you're not looking at your Tom Greens. Not really a Finn Callahan sort of guy either, so not really looking at anyone there. For Friday night, Crows vs Hawks. Not looking at anyone from Hawks, obviously. They don't really have anyone that has a huge ceiling realistically. Dawson, someone that I looked at, he does like these sort of big games. I could see him going quite well against Hawks here, but again, Hawks are going to come out firing. I think their season on the line. They need to win one of these tougher games, and I think they see a bit of an easier one against the Crows rather than against the likes of Collingwood and Brisbane. So I think they're going to try and go pretty hard at this one. I think they match up pretty well. So I think they could try and stop Dawson a fair bit. So Nash could go to a Dawson. And Dawson just has been a little bit down in his form, so I'm not going there. So I think a lot of people are going to look for Saturday games. You got the likes of Melbourne Eagles, Suns, and obviously Richmond. That's going to be a pretty fruitful game. Sydney and Essendon, again, very fruitful. And that's probably a lot of options that a lot of people will be looking at. So when you're out and about this weekend, just a reminder, obviously, look at your VC scores. Make sure you have your loops in place and have all your plans in place because, yeah, obviously, the later your captaincy odds are and the more the round progresses, things can happen, and then you could be stuck. So just be careful. But let's get into captains. My number one is obviously where a lot of people are going is Nasai Wanganeen-Milera. He is just him at the moment. I've said it before and I'll say it again. He is just absolutely killing it at the moment. Scored a 104 against North earlier in the year when he was playing more halfback. Obviously, he's moved into this full-time midfield role and is absolutely killing it at the moment. Hitting the scoreboard, getting plenty of marks around the ground, even tackling a fair bit as well. He's on a 125 average in his last 5, so that just shows you how much he is killing it at the moment. He averages 98 against the likes of North across his 4 games, so doesn't mind them in that scenario. He also has scored 151 and 149 in the last 2 matchups, which have been tough matchups. So North are the second easiest matchup for midfielders at the moment. So you got the scores of Isaac Heaney with a 166. Tom Liberatore and Marcus Bontempelli both went 130 plus. Caleb Sarong, Andy Brayshaw both 136 and 146. Nick Dacos and Ned Long both 130s. Bailey Smith and Max Holmes last weekend went 132 and 118. So this should be a walk-up 120 against North here for Nasai Langini-Miller, of someone of his caliber, with his rich vein of form and how good he's been at the moment. The only small flag I'll say, and a lot of people are talking about it, is obviously he's probably the most talked up man in the last 3 or 4 days since obviously that amazing win for Saints against Melbourne on the weekend. Does that draw some attention to him from North? Do they throw, I don't even know who they'll throw. Do they throw a power on him just to keep him more accountable? I don't think he probably has the legs to go with him. I don't see it happening, so that's why he's my number one. But I'm just saying that there's a potential option that they could look to throw someone at him just to keep him less damaging than what he has been. But they could have done. Why didn't North do that last week when Baz had 43 touches against him? So yeah, I just don't see it happening, and that's why he's my number one, and he'll probably be my captain this weekend. So he is a very good option. I do think he could hit a 140. Probably one of the only ones. Number 2 is his teammate in Rowan Marshall. He, again, comes up against North, but it is a cherryless North, so he's going up against Bryn Teakle as a solo ruck. Now, this is obviously only if Rowan Marshall is solo ruck without Heath. Obviously, Heath got dropped last weekend. Teams haven't come out yet, so I'm not 100% sure, but if Rowan Marshall is solo ruck against Bryn Teakle, he should have a day out. We saw the likes of Brodie Grundy score a 129 in pretty much three quarter time against the likes of Bryn Teakle. So Rowan Marshall can absolutely do that as well. And he scored a 117 against them last year, but that was obviously against the likes of what's his name? Cherry. So much tougher matchup, should have a much easier day. This should be a walk-up 120, 130 for him, as long as he is solo ruck, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. If Heath is named, then obviously Marshall will drop out of my top 5, and I'll just bring the list up also. So if you have Rowan Marshall, he could be another decent option. Obviously, these two play at the same time, so unfortunately, you won't be able to CVC them. You have to just go with one or the other. Just see. Depends on what your risk profile is. Obviously, Nasai could cop a bit of attention. So maybe you could go with Rowan Marshall, a bit more of a safer C, who also has a big ceiling on him. So yeah, see what your risk profile is there. I don't have Rowan Marshall, so I'm just going with Nas at this stage. Number 3 is again another ruck, and that is Brodie Grundy. Brodie Grundy, he went 115 against the likes of Todd Goldstein early in the year. So Goldstein, obviously older gentleman, he is a bit past it and doesn't really quite get around the ground as good as the likes of Brodie Grundy is at the moment. And obviously Brodie Grundy is absolutely killing it. He is averaging 127 across his last 5 games. So when we're talking about Nasai being one of the best, you got Brodie Grundy who's actually outscoring him in that last 5 as well. So shows you how good he's going at the stage. He's also averaging 123 at the likes of SCG in the last 5 games. So absolutely ripping apart there. The other thing that I quite like and what I factored into this positioning is that it's going to be wet weather for them. So looking at the forecasts, if you haven't used the website before, this is AFL ratings, AFL weather, just sort of gives you a bit of an indication of the forecast for each game along the weekend. So for that Sydney game, it's looking like it's going to be 10 to 45 mil throughout the game. So that is just going to mean it's going to be a scrappy game. A lot of ruck contests. Could be, over 100 ruck contests in that game. A lot of tackles. And we've seen that even last week, the likes of Timmy English was able to have 22 touches against Todd Goldstein. But English wasn't able to capitalize in the hit-out department. I think he only had to have like 22 or 23 hit-outs, whereas I think Brodie Grundy is a much better tap ruckman, so he gets those hit-outs much better, and he also grabs it out of the ruck a lot more. So he's going to be able to put it on boot, get a pretty big score. So he's definitely one I highly recommend as a captaincy option at number 3 there. Obviously plays the likes of Saturday afternoon, so 5th game of the round. Can have a sneaky BC on him, and obviously can go quite big. Number 4 is Max Gawn. Again, he is just looking to rip it apart the final stage of the season. Obviously having a tougher couple matchups, but now he's really opening up. He scored a 158 against the likes of West Coast earlier in the year. However, that was against Matt Flynn. From more reports that I'm seeing come through, Matt Flynn has been dropped for this game, and it's going to be just a solo Bailey Williams against him. Now, that does that has made me result in moving Max Gawn down a little bit, because I do rate Bailey Williams as a bit of a tougher ruckman than what Matt Flynn is. At least Bailey Williams knows how to do the ruck contest and does take some points away there, and does know how to follow someone around the ground as a bit more of a athletic player. So he's not going to get these cheaper possessions around the ground as much. So I'm not as hopeful that Max Gawn's going to have a field day. We've also seen in the past that West Coast do, do a team tag on Max Gawn, because he is such an impactful player against them. So I could potentially see that happening again. When I'm looking back into the data, you've got Max Gawn only scoring a 71 and a 71 and an 86 against Bailey Williams last year. So not great history against him himself. However, that 71 was an injured game. He was subbed out, early stages in the fourth, so he was on track for a decent score, but nothing amazing. So I'm just not as hopeful on this pick. However, looking at the scores of the last 5 against West Coast, you got, a Nank with a 110, Briggs with a 103, Dusty Cameron with a 102, TDK with a 109, Cherry with a 111. All these sort of like low tons, nothing amazing. So I could see a very decent score from Max Gawn, because you'd probably rate Max Gawn as a better ruckman than all those guys on that list. However, when I looked back through the data early in the season when it was just Bailey Williams, you had a TDK with a 75. That was obviously in that Adelaide game where it was hot, gather around. Briggs went 96. Luke Jackson went 102. Oscar McInerney with an 86. So there's just no real big data against Bailey Williams that he's going to go massive. I know he was a much easier matchup last year when, he just wasn't as skillful in the ruck, but recently he's been a bit tougher. So that for those sort of reasons, I have dropped Max Gawn down a bit, but I still think he could be a very valid option, who could obviously pop a bit of a score here with the history there against them. So I do like him as an option, but I think there's better elsewhere. Number 5, I have gone with one of the Gold Coast boys, obviously up against the likes of Richmond. And I have gone with Matt Rowell. Probably one of the first times I've put him inside my top 5. This season, he's been super amazing for the best part of 2 months now. So he is a valid option in the captaincies. Looks like to have a pretty solid floor with, averaging, hasn't dropped below 100 in about 9 or 10 weeks now. So he is a valid F5 option. He loves playing Richmond. Simple as that. It is his number 1 ranked team against across his 6 games he's played them so in his career. He averages 100 against them with 3 scores of 110 plus in that time. So does not mind playing them at all. However, did score an 88 early in the year against them, but has a 3-game average of 134 with his 2 140s in there. So does know how to find a ceiling, and he just looks like a different beast than what he was back then when he scored that 88. So I do expect him to go quite well, and reason why I put him as a pretty high priority in targeting your trade targets there. So I don't think I need to read out all the scores that have been against Richmond. I think we all know that they're a much easier matchup, but it's going to be a pretty fruitful game for them over there at the People's First Stadium. So they're just going to thrive in this game. It should be a bit of a fantasy fest for both him and Anderson, which leads me into my next 5. So Noah Anderson does sneak in at number 6. So, if Merrill Marshall does happen to have Heath next to him, I will get the likes of Anderson up into 5th, and, so forth. Very similar scenario as Matt Rowell. Anderson loves playing against Richmond. Again, it is his number 1 team he scores against. However, he has averaged 115 against them in his career. Again, 6 matches. So there's probably an argument to say that Noah Anderson has a better history against the likes of Richmond. However, I prefer with the stats that Richmond love to concede tackles. I think the top 3 team that concedes tackles. So I think it leads to a higher floor from a Matt Rowell. And there's just concerns that Anderson can cop a tag from anyone. It doesn't matter who it is, and he can have a downer game. We've seen it in the past from Richmond, what they've used the likes of Ross. He tagged Merritt only a couple weekends ago, and that reduced him from a 140 ceiling to just a low ton. So I could see that very much happening to a Noah Anderson. I do think they're very similar players in that stance. So I just think with Matt Rowell's tackling ability and with the way that tackling numbers are being counted at the moment, he has a much higher ceiling than what Anderson has at this stage. But, Anderson has had 4 110 plus scores against Richmond in his career with, a 134, 141, and a 126 in there as well. So it does have a decent ceiling against them in the past. So very valid option if you wanted to go there with a bit more of a VC option. Number 7, I have just thrown Baz in there. He's got Port Adelaide this weekend. Obviously off the back of 43 touches last week. It's hard to go past him. He's been, an amazing player all year. Still averaging the highest so far this season, 117 across the season. So he's always a very valid option. Does play the second last game of the round. So if you wanted to have a bit of stab in the dark with, whether it's an Anderson or, any of the other top 5 I've selected, you could always roll into a Baz quite comfortably. So, yeah, just got to watch, obviously, with him potentially being laid out. I don't think it happens, but there's always that concern with Geelong. Number 8, I have gone with Tim English, who isn't as highly selected. He loves playing Briggs against GWS there. So he scored a 124 against them early in the season and just gets the job done. Briggs has been a very easy matchup for Bruckman in the past, with even Brodie Grundy last week going 130 against them. So I think Tim English could go very well again this weekend if you have him as a Thursday night player, if you want to have an early VC. Number 9, Nick Dacos needs to be in here as well. Obviously, he's been in some ripping form of late, so you can't go past him. He scored a 131 against Brisbane earlier in the year, and does average 111 against them across his 6 matches in his career with 4 110 plus scores in there. The only flag is, with how good he's been in the past and with obviously Brisbane being a bit shaky, obviously losing against Gold Coast last weekend, I feel like they could potentially tag him, whether that's through a Berry straight off the centre bounce or, a Dunkley doing some stoppage work around there. There's going to be some attention put into him, so I just think that really drops his ceiling down a little bit, and I don't know if I'd be super comfortable going into him at this stage. So that's why he is number 9. And to round up top 10, I have got Andy Brayshaw against the likes of Colton. Colton are a very easy matchup at this stage. They are bright green. I don't even know where he's on this list. There he is. He scored a 148 against them last year in round 4, so a little while ago. But again, it's going to be quite a wet weather game. I'll show you that again. It's looking like it's going to be 5 to 20 mil on Sunday in Perth. So again, that should mean good things for a tackler like Brayshaw. So he should get around it a fair bit. And we're seeing some really good tacklers score well against Carlton. In the last 10 matchups, you've had Josh Dunkley with a 137, Bergman with a 120, Tom Powell with a 113, and a Caldwell with a 110. And you could even throw in a Nick Dacos with a 132. I know he's not a tackler, but just to highlight some of the scores there that have been against Carlton in the last 10 matches, that they do concede some bigger scores. So I could see a bit of a bounce back game for Brayshaw, where he's been a bit down in the recent times. So that is my top 10. A few others I haven't mentioned. Like I said, Bontempelli, I do think he cops a bit of attention in this game. I'm not sure quite who from, but definitely could be from Toby Bedford. And they're the hardest matchup so far in the recent 10 matches, so I'm just not going there. Errol Goulden would have been a good matchup against Essendon, but because it's a wet weather game, I just think he could be stuck out on the wing a fair bit, not probably getting as much of those tackles that we are used to him getting. Heaney, for the same sort of reason, wet weather, I think he would have thrived a lot more if it was a clear day. He could go up and kick 5 goals himself like he did against North a couple weekends ago. But wet weather definitely could change and work in Essendon's favour a little bit. Spoke about Dawson already. Jeremy Cameron, I know he's just come off 11 goals, but I think Port Adelaide is a much different scenario than North Melbourne. Obviously, they're still quite a decent side, just having a down patch at this stage this year. They've still got the likes of Aaliyah back there, and I think he'll hold Jeremy Cameron to a reasonable score. I just don't see a 120 plus. I still think he can hit a ton, but I don't quite see him having a massive game that we're looking for. Lockie Whitfield could go great, but yeah, I guess again, Western Bulldogs are going to come out firing a fair bit, so I'm not quite sure he's going to have that massive thing that we're looking for. Jack Sinclair could go well, but defenders against North haven't been the best. You're not looking at Tom Green. Sheasel, he's so hard to predict at the stage. He could have a good game, but not super keen on that. And then we'll get into some very unique stages. So, no, that'll be about it for today, I reckon. So, please let me know what you think of the top 10 captains this week. Let me know what you're doing down below. If you have any questions, again, drop them in the comment section. I will get back to you, hopefully before the game starts in a couple hours' time. Besides that, have a great weekend, everyone, and I'll see you next week. Bye.